dark and stormy night. Nearby is the dwelling place of Hunding. And this is where the first act of Wagner's Die Walküre takes place. This is the second of the ring cycle, but there are no Valkyries in this first act. It's just a three-hander. When we take up the music, Hunding is off stage, out to the wide, Sieglinde, his wife, having spiked his nightcap. She is the sister of the third character in this act, Siegmund. But at this stage, neither of them is aware of the relationship. Sieglinde was a forced bride with no love for Hunding, her brutish husband. At the beginning of the act, Siegmund stumbles out of that storm, exhausted, weaponless, and he's given refreshment and haven by Sieglinde. It turns out that Hunding and his henchmen have been hunting the very man that he is obliged to give haven to. Though he warns Siegmund, come the morning, he will kill him. Siegmund is left alone on stage. Suddenly, but quietly, Sieglinde comes back, telling Siegmund, amongst other things, how the sword came to be planted in the tree, which forms the central part of Schee Hunding. Nobody's been able to get it out so far. At the end of Sieglinde's scene, the door suddenly opens to reveal the moonlight, which in turn reveals the sword gleaming in the tree. By common consent, this 1935 recording of the first act of Die Walküre is one of the glories of the gramophone, a vintage year indeed, Bruno Walter conducting the Vienna Philharmonic in a performance of lyrical fluidity that is a revelation to present-day Wagner ears. The tenor, Siegmund, is the unsurpassed Loritz Melchior, and the soprano, Sieglinde, is, of course, Lotte Lehmann, warm, passionate, every inch a woman and every note a woman.
Wer schleicht daher?
Ich wink, hör mich an. In tiefem Schlaf liegt Hunding, ich würz ihm betäubenden Trank. Bitte die Nacht dir zum Reuen.
Heil, mach mich dein Name.
Eine Waffe, lass mich dir weisen, wenn du sie gewinnst. Sippe saß hier im Saal, von Hunding zur Hochzeit geladen. Er freut ein Weib, das ungefragt Schächer ihm schenkten zur Frau. Traurig saß ich, während sie tranken. Ein Fremder trat da herein. Deckt ihm der Augen eines, doch das andern Strahl Angst schuf es allen, traf die Männer sein mächtiges sich wühlten, die Wehr sich keiner gewann. Gäste kamen und Gäste gingen, die Stärksten zogen aus Stahl. Keinen Zoll entwich er dem Stand. Dort haftet schweigend das Schwert. Da wusst ich, wer der war, der mich grauenvoll gegrüßt. Ich weiß auch, wie an einem Schrank das Schwert steht. Ich gelitten in grimmigem Leid, was ewig geschmerzt in Schande und was je ich beweint, werde gewonnen, wenn ich den heiligen Freund und wen die
Ich selige Frau, kenn du das Freund, wenn Lach und Weib bestehen. Heiß in der Brust brennt mir der Eid, der mich dir Edlen verwählt. Was ich je gesehen, das sah ich in dir fand ich, was je mir gefehlt. Liebtest du Schmach und Schmerzen mich leid, war ich geächtet und warst du entehrt. Freudige Rache, dass du den Frohen, oh, lach ich in heiliger Nacht. Bald ich dich her empfangen, fühl ich dein schlagenden Herz. Keiner ging, noch keiner kam, sie hat erwähnt, lacht in den Saal.
Part of the first act of Wagner's Die Walküre, with Lauritz Melchior and the Vienna Philharmonic under Bruno Walter. Sieglinde was sung by Lotte Lehmann. At the end of this hour I shall play you more of the same, a large chunk. But now for the parallel but different art of Lieder. The voice has to be scaled down. It's another kind of communicating. In her autobiography, Lehmann confesses there was not an easy transition from the stage to the more intimate world of the recital room. But she managed it supremely well, thanks to her intuition and the help of musicians like Bruno Walter and Richard Strauss. In this Schubert song, Im Abendrot, in the sunset, the singer thanks God. How beautiful is your world when it shines golden and the red glow of evening sinks into my quiet window. This heart, ere it stops, will still drink in the glow and the light. And that last line is repeated by Schubert. Trink noch Glut und schlürft noch Licht. And Lehmann's voice rises from the depth up the stave in the most wonderful way.
Oh, wie schön ist deine Welt, Vater, wenn sie gut
Irina Bolok, accompanying Lotte Lehmann in Schubert's Im Abendrot, a recording that shows the soprano to be a real mistress of the art of Lieder. I'm sure that by now, even if you'd not heard this singer before, you would be aware of her musical personality emerging before your ears. A voice of great beauty, matched to a rare sensibility, a voice that speaks directly to you. As well as German, Lotte Lehmann also sang in Italian and French and even English. Here she is in a song by that underrated French composer Reynaldo Hahn. The words are Baudelaire's. It's a poem that Fauré also set, a reflection of the time when the poet Baudelaire was put in jail for a murderous attack on his young colleague Arthur Rimbaud. The song sings of the desolation of being in prison, and the little that the prisoner can see of the tranquil world outside his barred cell, a little bit of sky, a bit of tree. Curiously enough, in the very quiet passages, Lehmann's voice reminds me here of Maggie Tate. So here is Prison, or D'une Prison, as its composer Reynaldo Hahn called it.
Calme, simple et tranquille, cette paisible rumeur vient de la ville. Qu'as-tu fait, ô toi, que voilà pleurant sans cesse? Dis, qu'as-tu fait, toi que voilà de ta jeunesse? Le ciel est par-dessus le toit, si bleu, si
A melody by Reynaldo Ahn, Prison. And by the way, that song, like the Schubert before it, was recorded in the second half of the 1930s, Lehmann still in her prime, her 40s. And here's another song recorded in that period, this time in English, a song by her Hungarian accompanist Ernő Bolok. It's called Do Not Chide Me. Not that I have to tell you that, because you can hear her words so clearly. This is a typical example of Lehmann really going for it, no holds barred.
do not chide me, my beloved, for trembling at your touch, for quivering when I see you, for loving you too much. Do not chide me, my beloved, for the pallor of my cheeks, for each hour I have waited, I have lived through days and weeks. Do not chide me, my beloved, for watching all the night, for the moment that will bring me once again into your sight. Do not chide me, my beloved, for the weakness that you see. I am strength itself, my dearest, when your love and do not chide me, do not chide me, do not chide me, my beloved.
I find that irresistible. Do Not Chide Me, wonderful encore piece. Lehmann with her pianist-composer Ernő Bolok. It's a strange thing. I think you might guess from our singer's musical personality that she came from the warmer, more passionate south of Germany or Austria. But in fact she was a Prussian, born 1888 into a lower middle-class family who moved to Hamburg, where she made her debut and made her name fairly quickly. After singing the routine pages, boys, bridesmaids and flower maidens, she came to sing Sophie, her first part in Strauss's Der Rosenkavalier, in London with Beecham in 1914. She moved to Vienna 2 years later, where she became part of that glorious ensemble there. singing lighter Wagner parts, Massenet, Puccini, even as heavy as Turandot, Tatiana and Tchaikovsky, Korngold, many forgotten operas, Strauss, and Strauss. But right now I want to play you some more Wagner. Lehmann would like to have sung some of the heavier roles in Wagner, but friends like Leo Schlezak, Richard Meyer, and Richard Strauss implored her not to, as they thought her voice would be ruined. What better way of spoiling one's voice? What a way to go, was her reply. But she took note. So she stuck with Elsa, Elisabeth, and Sieglinde on stage. However, she did record the Liebestod from Tristan, and quite wonderful it is, even though the accompaniment isn't all that hot. Or the recording. It is 1930. Needless to say, Lehmann's Isolde is a totally different view and sound from Flagstad's more northern approach. Lotte Lehmann makes you listen to the words for once. Look, friends, see how he breathes. Seht ihr, Freunde, she says to Brangäne and Mark. Seht ihr's nicht. Infinitely touching. Lehmann gets as near ecstasy as a performer can without losing control. She recreates afresh this love in death and death in love. Lotte Lehmann as Isolde in the recording studio. There she could control herself, which she didn't always on stage or concert platform. There was a famous 1938 Rosenkavalier in the Royal Opera House, Covent Garden, broadcast and all, when she packed up during the first act. She was worried by events at home, she said. Her husband was Jewish, and there were ardent Nazis in the cast, needling her, even on the stage. Mind you, when Hilda Konetzny was hauled out of the audience to take over the part of the Marschallin, she found that Lotte had not only gone from her dressing room, but had actually taken her costumes with her. At Lotte's farewell recital, many years later, she buried her face in her hands when she reached the last line of An die Musik. And one time when, miraculously, she didn't break down was during a recital when she was called by the local Gauleiter to the telephone to speak to Reich Minister Hermann Göring. She finished her group before going to the telephone. But the audience positively took fright at the interruption, thinking that Lehmann would be whisked away forthwith to a concentration camp, and that if they applauded, they might somehow be implicated. After 21 years as a member of the Vienna Opera, Lehmann left, but not before she had sung a concert performance of the Liebestod with Toscanini. It seems the two were somewhat infatuated with each other, although not at one time on this particular occasion, because she'd asked him for help in the performance for pitching her rather difficult first note. He said he would sing the note for her. When the time came, all he gave her was an unpitched buzz in his throaty, gruff voice. Lotte said later, "In desperation, I prayed to God, and he gave me the note." That was in Vienna, and we can't leave Lotte's adopted city without hearing something of the city's most typical music by the other Strauss, Johann, even though this number is the paprika-flavoured Schadasch from Die Fledermaus, recorded in 1931. We all expected her to go up at the end, but she didn't. She came down. Fledermaus, the Schadasch by Johann Strauss. Lotte Lehmann sang the part of Rosalinde in Die Fledermaus only in London and recorded it in Berlin. Was it a coincidence, or was she wary of singing Johann Strauss in Vienna, where they're almost as critical about foreigners singing Viennese as English critics are about anybody singing any foreign language? With Richard Strauss, it was another matter. Lotte sang Sophie, Octavian, and the Marschallin in his Rosenkavalier. The latter part became her visiting card, her most famous role. She also created the part of Christine in Intermezzo, and she sang the dyer's wife in Frau ohne Schatten, the composer and Ariadne in Ariadne and Naxos, and Arabella in Arabella. All this is leading up to, eventually, playing Lehmann's most celebrated record of all, the final trio from the abridged set of Rosenkavalier. No Lehmann portrait would be complete without it, despite my having played the trio to you late last year in a program about Elisabeth Schumann. The third member of the trio here is Maria Olszewska as Octavian. But before I play that, I'd like you to hear Lotte Lehmann talking. It's an interview made in 1957 when she was in London for master classes. Of course, Lotte took the stage at the Wigmore Hall for these master classes. Sometimes it was the Lotte Lehmann show. She played to the gallery, and we loved it. I think the best performance of the flower song from Carmen I ever heard was Lehmann, growling at an octave lower than written. Suddenly she was Don Jose, and head over heels in love. In fact, she could become any character immediately and overwhelmingly. From that, the students certainly could learn. Backstage, she could be very terse sometimes. I heard her say once to the accompanist, Ivor Newton, "My God, are they all virgins?" "No, Lotte," said Ivor Newton. I know for a fact that some are married and have children." "No, I mean they are virgins temperamentally," she said. But now here is the maestra herself, and afterwards we'll go straight into the Rosenkavalier trio.
Oh, I started 1910 my career. 1911 I sang Sophie. And then later on I sang Octavian. In 1916 I came to Vienna. That was then the court opera, and I continued to sing Octavian. Well, then one day I found on my writing desk the contract for Covent Garden. But if I wouldn't sing the Marschallin, the contract wouldn't go through. They needed a Marschallin. I had never sung it. I saw Covent Garden, I saw Bruno Walter, and without thinking I signed it. And I learned then very quickly the Marschallin. And when I came to London, I will never forget the first rehearsal with Bruno Walter. He almost fainted when I said to him, "I've never sung it." But he helped me tremendously, and that I perhaps fitted into this marvelous performance without disturbing it. It was really something. I was never a very exact singer, I must say, to my shame.
Really?
Yeah. But Strauss didn't care. Strauss was really fantastic. He always wanted, for him, the most important thing was the whole role, the conception of the role, the effect on the audience. And he didn't care if one was very exact. When I sang for the first time Christine in Intermezzo, the premiere was in Dresden. And he had given the premiere only if I would sing Christine. They didn't like that at all, which is very understandable. They wanted to have their own people, but they had to consent. And in the rehearsal, when I made my first mistake, everybody looked at him. And he interrupted and started to smile and said, "You know, I know Lehmann is a very erratic singer. But I must really say I like her better than all the exact singers in the world." So that was rather, and forgive me that I boast about that.
Well, one can see that in several of Strauss parts. I mean, Clytemnestra, I don't think anybody could actually sing all the notes right.
No, and Intermezzo, was something very new. It is a domestic affair. It is really a story of his own life. And there is the Kapellmeister Storch, that is Strauss really. And Christine is really Pauline, his wife. And since his wife always fought with everybody on earth, so I had to fight through the whole opera. And he gave me the greatest compliment he could give to anybody. He said to me, "You know, Lotte, you really remind me very much of my wife," which...
Did you take that as a compliment?
After a moment of breathtaking silence, I said, "Thank you."
Was Pauline there at the performance?
Oh, yes.
And how did she like to see herself represented by you on the stage?
She found everything terrible. She always found everything terrible. What
She
her
was a
husband
singer,
has
wasn't she?
done. Oh, she always said his music is dreadful. She likes only Massenet and Puccini.
Poor
She
man.
said that always. Oh, he loved that.
Really?
Oh, he loved it. He adored his wife. You know, he was accustomed everybody bowing down before him. And I was for 2 weeks in his house in Garmisch, in his country house, studying with him the dyer's wife in Frau ohne Schatten, the Woman Without Shadow. And after this time was over, he said to me, "Now, Lotte, you have lived now through very many fights I had with my wife. But I give you the assurance that one of her fits of fury is to me more interesting than the adoration of the whole world."
One can understand that in a way.
Yes, in a way, but she was really
Except that
dreadful.
nobody else liked her. I mean, they all
No.
found her dreadful, didn't they?
Oh no, she was to everybody terrible. She was really. Do you know the story when they got engaged? It's a very well-known story, and he told it to me himself, so it's very authentic. When he was a young conductor, she sang with him, Tannhäuser, and she has made a mistake, and he interrupted the rehearsal, and she took a book or anything which she had in her hand and threw it into the orchestra. She was an absolute devil, I assure you. He interrupted the rehearsal, very furious, and went to her artist room, and people outside hear terrible shrieking, and they didn't know who kills whom in this moment. And then somebody from the orchestra came, and they had made up their mind they would refuse to play in future when Miss Diana, Pauline, when she would sing. They felt they owed that to the maestro. And they knocked at the door, and he came out, and they told him that. And he said, with a radiant smile, "I would regret that very much, gentlemen, because I got just engaged with Miss Diana."
Marvelous story.
Yes.
But what sort of man was? I mean, it's curious that he put himself into his music so much.
Now that is all I think. I think
Is
it
that
was all
conceit?
to create a monument for his wife. I really think so. He adored her so that it was quite overwhelming. There never existed anybody like his wife for him. How you see how he was as a person. I found him when I lived disappointing. He very much about money, about what his operas bring him, and being so under the thumb of his wife, one didn't feel his presence in his home. One felt the presence of his wife very much. Only when we rehearsed, there was Strauss, the real Strauss. And I sang almost every evening, I sang his lieder with him. And he took lieder from early times. And sometimes he said, "Oh my God, I have forgotten that entirely. Let's do that." And then Pauline also, I saw then another side of Pauline, because very often she came and broke into tears and embraced him, and there was always some reminiscence which they
sentimental
shared, some
association.
sentimental, yeah.
But for him, certainly the mood was,
That was the main thing.
feeling, the overall conception of the part.
Yeah, and the characterization, really to bring a part to life and to be the part, that was to him much more important than anything else.
Lotte Lehmann sings the first long phrase, then Schumann trumps her. Olszewska comes in a bar later. Here's Lehmann. Final trio, Act 3, Rosenkavalier by Richard Strauss. Schumann and Olszewska. Vienna, 1933. With a Jewish husband, whose name she doesn't even mention, curiously, in her autobiography, Lotte Lehmann got out of Nazi Austria and went to the USA. Santa Barbara was her home for most of her remaining 30-odd years. She continued to sing opera until 1947, ending, natürlich, with the Marschallin, a part she sang over 120 times. In her career, she sang 92 roles, this is the statistics bit, and she gave well over 1,600 performances on stage. She went on with her recitals a bit longer until 1951, thereafter masterclasses, mostly in California, where she died on the 26th of August, 1976, at the ripe age of 88. No children, lots of dogs, just the one husband who didn't seem to figure very large in her priorities. To meet, she was charming sometimes, although she could be brusque, even butch. But on the stage she was the quintessence of femininity, the ewige Weibliche. Not a wilting female, mind you, but impulsive and wildly attractive. She was a famous Leonora in Fidelio, but her recording of the big aria is disappointing. She confessed to not really understanding Mozart, or the part of Tosca, though she sang it quite a lot. Not as many, however, as Manon, which she played 60 times, mostly opposite that great English Viennese Alfred Pickaver. Lehmann lives on through her records, of which I've played you now some of the best, those that truly show her vibrant musical personality. I should like to end, as I began, with more of that superb recording of Act 1 of Die Walküre. We move, rather abruptly, into Sieglinde's outburst to her sibling, "You are the spring, du bist der Lenz." On to Siegmund's triumphant pulling of the sword out of the ash tree, "Notung, Notung, Notung," he shouts, and the couple's ecstatic joy in discovering their love. An incestuous love, but, for the moment, a happy one. It is one of Wagner's most lyrical duets, with Loritz Melchior, the Vienna Philharmonic under Bruno Walter, as they were in 1935, and centre stage, our heroine of this hour, the divine and never-to-be-forgotten Lotte Lehmann.
Ich nie es gekannt, war was immer mir kam. Doch dich konnt ich deutlich und klar, als mein Auge dich sanft du mein eigen, was im Busen ich war. Ich bin wie der Tag, taucht es gelang, in den Schlag, schlug mein Ohr, als ich aus dem Öder Fremde zuerst ich den Kaiser.
des Mond, leuchtest du hell, herum webt dich das Wellenhaar.
Lotte Lehmann and Loritz Melchior with the Vienna Philharmonic Orchestra, conducted by Bruno Walter, in Act 1 of Wagner's Die Walküre, a recording made in 1935. It ends this week's edition of Vintage Years, introduced by John Amos. The producer was Patrick Lambert. Next week, John Amos will be presenting a musical portrait of Benjamin Britten.